All right, let's get down to business. In Chapter 5, The Road to the Undisputed Heavyweight Championship Story, Chapter 5, the WBA Super Heavyweight Champion. Now, guys, I should be talking about the WBA Regular Heavyweight Champion. I should be talking about the WBA in everything. But in all fairness, guys, I think it's probably for the best because the WBA Regular and the WBA Super, the Gold and the Interim, it's... Well, guys, I'm sure there's a lot of fans out there that don't pay attention to boxing or professional wrestling. Like, there's two types of fans that we know. There's fans that only pay attention to fights, known as regular fans, and the second type of fans are smart fans. Smart fans are the term for... the smart fans are more... They follow the sport more than fans watching fights on TV. Smart fans like myself are the ones that look up information online, know the history. We know what we're talking about. So, for instance, there's 90% of people back in 2021 in January that have only paid attention to Alexander Usyk and mostly Tyson Fury and AJ and probably Deontay Wilder. But around that time is when Trevor Bryan defeated Bermane Stiverne for the WBA regular champion. The thing is, how many people were even paying attention to the WBA champion? I'm sure there's a lot of fans that don't even know who Trevor Bryan was at the time because there's not a lot of information or news or TV programs about him. And the last time he was ever on air was back in 2016 on a YouTube video taking on a guy named Galen Brown. And then 4.5 years later, in January 2021, he's back on camera on TV defeating Bermane Stiverne. And even though I'm going to talk about the WBA regular in another episode, I decided to make this a two-part episode of the WBA. And the reason I'm talking about the WBA Super, because the WBA Super has not been involved in the heavyweight since 2011. But believe me, guys, there's going to be a lot of interesting information I'm going to talk about the WBA in another time. It's going to be crazy, and you viewers are going to love it. And there's going to be reasons why the WBA Super is actually a more legit major belt than the regular, and why there's over like 90% of regular fans that always pay attention to those things, and 10% of us smart fans pay attention to more of the information, because a lot of us don't think the WBA regular belt is not legit. Why is the WBA regular belt not major? To be honest, does it matter? Now, guys, at the end of the day, does it matter? Well, it kind of does, because we have two major belts, WBA regular and WBA super, and that's it. So, guys, I've already talked about the information during the history when I was talking about the IBO belt on my other podcast, when I talked about how the WBA was formed in 1921 when there was the NBA, National Boxing Association, and then in 1962 was known as the WBA World Boxing Association, which I think they changed it because the title and the logo of the NBA was the same initials than the NBA National Basketball Association, so they tried to change it in 1962. And then in 1964, they had their first title shot with that belt of the WBA with Liston and Ali won the fight in the first fight. And then we also had that history talking about Ali vacated the belt because he didn't want to take on... He wanted to have a rematch with Liston in 1965, which we already know, the Phantom Punch, and it took him a couple years later in 1967 to win back the WBA belt. Then he was getting drafted for Vietnam and this or that. Guys, there's a lot of other controversies we could talk about, but it goes to show you that the WBA, when it was formed in 1962, had a lot of problems during the first years when its initials were changed. The heavyweight had problems, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't know the history about that moment. And guys, there's going to be other information I'm going to talk about more in the next episode. The only information viewers do have to know that in 1982, it did state that interviewer an interview when promoter Bob Arum did claim that he had paid WBA officials to obtain rank-ins for his fighters and further support for allegations in the 80s and 90s when two of the organizations of the WBC and IBF had similar corruption exposed during the conviction of the IBF president, Bobby Lee. And it's pretty interesting. I'll be back in a second. But yeah, like I was about to say, of course, like I said, Bobby Lee Sr. and Graciano were involved with civil prosecution of WBC and, like I said, of the IBF president, Bobby Lee Sr. and this or that from bankruptcy. And I've already talked about the IBF ratings system and the flaws in the 90s with that of litigations and such back in the day. So, yeah, when you hear the history, the WBA had other problems. In all highness, there's more information than meets the eye about the WBA, but the WBA Super never became major until 11 years later, like even when Lennox Lewis vacated his belt and when it was the original after his Undisputed. For reasons why, well, there's going to be a lot of interesting information I'm going to read in the next episode, because this episode I'm doing right now is going to be shorter, but the next chapter is going to be a lot longer when I talk about the regular. But, yeah, it's only been 6.5 minutes since I started this podcast, so I'm just going to swing it by quickly as possible. So, guys, here's the information I know. Now, guys, there's only some fights I haven't talked about Vladimir Klitschko, and I'm going to talk about them now. I've already talked about John Mark Mormick and the Tony Thompson fights, and his Marius Wash fight in 2012, and so, or even his fight against Francisco Pianeta, and his Alex Lepay, Kubrat Pulev, Brian Jenkins, Vladimir Klitschko, and even talking about how the Klitschko fight with Joshua in the IBO episode I did. So, and when you talk about Carlos Tacom and Joseph Parker and how he changed his boxing styles to fighting in the inside in the Poviekin fight, and that's how it caused his demise to lose his first fight in June the 1st against Andy Ruiz. And then they had a rematch in Saudi Arabia. He won him back. But, yeah, the first decade of the WBA Super Belt was interesting during the start of the 2010s. But there's only two fights I have not talked about. And the first one I will talk about goes by in July the 2nd. Vladimir Klitschko takes on WBA regular champion, which this is for the WBA Super Belt, David Haye. Now, guys, I'm not much of a fond person loving David Haye. I'm not much of a fan of him as much. Like, he had his titles and his great affairs in his cruiserweight division, winning it a couple of times with John Mormack and Enzo Maccarinelli. But then when he goes up to heavyweight in 2008, goes one fight, then he takes on the tallest 7-foot-tall giant, which I'll get to in another episode. How that was the great David and Goliath of the end of the decade of the 2000s. And then his two title defenses in 2010 were the worst. I even consider David Haye is the worst ever one-time heavyweight champion of all time in boxing in the top 10. Yeah, the worst. When I say the worst, I mean the worst. And I'll get to that in later for why in another episode when I make a top 5 or top 10 list. But yeah, Vladimir Klitschko, he went all out. He went all out into this fight. And to be honest, Vladimir was working on more jabs than he was doing power punches. While David Haye, he wasn't throwing a lot of jabs. He wasn't landing a lot of them. He was more into power punches once in a while. Like the 12 rounds fight, he only landed 72 punches in 12 rounds, in 290 punches total. Vladimir only had 134 out of 509 punches thrown at the time. And by the way, guys, there is another piece of information I would like to talk about, that even though this was Vladimir Klitschko's 10th title defense for his IBO and IBF champion, his 6th title defense with his WBO, and his 3rd title defense with the Ring Magazine, This is David Haye's third title defense for the WBA World Heavyweight Champion, even though this is his first time he's defending it as the WBA Super. So technically the rule goes is this, that he vacated the WBA World Champion, or he was vacated the regular champion, but was giving a Super World Champion. And I think the reasons for that would have to be because of Ruslan Shadjev and how he had his title stripped at one point in 2008 or 2007 because he had an injury or something. So he was known as the WBA Championship of Recess during a time when Nikolai had the champion, and then they decided to create another belt. But there is something interesting I will talk about of how the WBA Super Belt was a thing in another episode. You viewers are going to be interested. But for now, this has nothing to do with the history of the controversy. I'll save that for the next episode. But yeah, mostly this is almost like the same type of thing like in the minimum weight division. Because in the minimum weight division, we actually have, as of right now, we still have one Thailand boxer named Thamanoon Niamontrung, also known as his alias Knockout CP Freshmart. Because he was the WBO regular champion during his win June 29, 2016 against Brian Rajas. He defended the belt again that same year, went on a couple more title defenses in 2017, defended it 3 times in 2018, once in China, but he always boxes in Thailand all his life. But mostly he gets a rematch with the same guy he won the belt with, and surprisingly, after his 6th title defense, he gets his 7th title defense win in 2019, and during the pandemic, when it comes to COVID in 2020, he fights for his 8th title defense against someone named Norihito Tanaka. But this time for the WBA regular, it's the WBA Super minimum weight champion. So Freshmart didn't vacate the regular belt. He was given the WBA Super belt when it was vacant around the time. So they gave it to him even when he was the regular champion. So technically, his reigns of his winning his title in June the 29th, 2016 still counts as his first reign. So he wasn't vacated the title after his August 2nd win against Arar, interesting name. He wasn't vacated the title. He was given the Super title during his 8th title defense, but was stripped of the WBA regular, but it still counts as his first title defense. He would still defend that WBA a couple more times in 2020, making his 9th and 10th title defenses by knockout, and then he would take on Moon Sri, the biggest hype job guy that had 54 wins undefeated, and then he threw it all away, and his career is now dead in 2022 when Freshmart finished him in 12-round fight, and that was his 11th title defense. And as of right now, it's now been almost, as of right now, while recording this, it's now been 23 months, and he still hasn't fought since. He was going to take on the guy that was originally known as the WBA regular champion, Eric Rosa, but that guy decided to move up to weight class because they're trying to order the fight against him. But yeah, so my point is, guys, David Haye, considering his 2 title defenses in 2010 was for the WBA regular, this Super Belt counts him as it's his 3rd title defense. So I guess it makes sense why there's some fans that are confusing about this, but no. This was his 3rd title defense, and he failed. Vladimir won the bout, 117-109, 118-108, 116-110 by all 3 judges, and that was the end. But the next title defense, like I said before, he defends it 4 more times around this moment. But then in October the 5th, 2013, he takes on Alexander Povetkin. Now, this is the final title defense I will talk about Vladimir Klitschko, because this fight right here, there's a lot of history. So the history goes is that Klitschko and Povetkin were originally supposed to fight in December 13th, 2008, but it was withdrawn due to Povetkin's ankle injury. The two were next to scheduled to meet on September the 11th, 2010, but the fight was unraveled when Povetkin, who had been training in New Jersey, failed to attend the press conference in Germany officially announcing the fight. The Povetkin's camp claimed the fighter had a sinus problem and would be unable to fly for 10 days. However, there were rumors that there was a difference of opinion within the Povetkin camp about the fight, as his promoter pushed for the bout. That Povetkin's manager and trainer, Teddy Atlas, wanted to delay it, believing the fighter wasn't ready to face Klitschko. And Klitschko's company complained to the IBF about Povetkin's missing news conference and this or that, and they almost got rid of the belt. But of course, around the time, I will talk about it because Povetkin would go on a year later after that to get the WBA regular belt. And there is going to be some interesting information about his title reigns from 2011 to 2013 and see how his title reigns was for the WBA regular, because at that moment, he was only rated number 1 in the WBA the entire year 2013 because of his win. So, at this moment, here's the information. So, Klitschko has his 5th title defense on the line for the WBA Super Belt. Mostly the WBA regular is not on the line. It's only one belt. Like, he strips the WBA regular belt just to fight for the Super Belt. That's the whole point. And you know what? With Teddy Atlas saying that he wasn't ready, man, 3 years later, he was never ready. Like, Vladimir Klitschko pushed him away as so much. Like, guys, you have over 150 countries broadcasting this in an average of 11.02 million views, and is as peaked in Germany with 12.30 million views, which was roughly 15% of the Germany's population, as 15% of the fans in the U.S. watched the fight in over 47 million views. They saw a 12-round fight. 23 million people watched the fight in Ukraine. And what they saw was a domination fight. Povetkin threw 283 punches and landed 59 of them in 12 rounds. Klitschko threw 417 but landed 139 punches total in the 12-round fight. There was one moment where, at the time, it did say that Klitschko, around the time, because it did stated that during the time when Klitschko was a champion, it stated that he was actually penalized because he knocked down Povetkin in round 2 during the final seconds of the fight, knocked him down early in round 7 in the first 30 seconds, knocked him again a minute later, and sometime with only a minute left, he knocked him down a third time or something. And then he was deducted a point for abduction. Klitschko was deducted 1 point in round 11. This fight was dirty, but it was just too dominant, and the score was all 119 to 104. All favored every round. One was Klitschko. This was the most... Guys, there's no information I can talk about this fight. I just... Like, guys, if I had to watch this fight and review this fight for you viewers from start to finish, there's nothing I could say. And even though we're 18, almost 19 minutes into this podcast right now, I think I'm almost done with this podcast. But here's some interesting information. The post-fight quotes did state that, stating that Klitschko did said that it was a tough bit of work. He's a real fighter. He kept landing the punches, but he stayed in there. He believed that it was a deserved win, but I think he can improve still. While Povetkin stated, things didn't quite go as well as planned. I wanted, but I never give up. Of course, he was a better fighter. He's the best in the world. That's clear. But is he entertaining? I really can't say that. Fun fact, that guys, this is also the 98th title fight in the WBA. Or if you count it as a WBA Super Belt, I can't tell. But mostly that's what it says live here, but mostly that's not the point. So, yeah, like I said before, guys, I went through every of the other fights I talked about, but 2020, this is what makes information different. come December 12th, 2020 would be the last time that unified champion would fight for, as number one ranked fighter, would fight for the IBF belt, and that's Kubrat Pulev. He lost against Joshua. He was ranked number one. Come September 25th, 2021, we have the number one WBO rank, Alexander Usyk. He was number one at the time in the WBO. Number four in the WBA and three in the IBF, which were the only ranks, and mostly that was it. But I really don't know. It was a really tough fight when you watch it, but looking back at it, there wasn't much you could say other than Usyk was the better man that day. Like, yes, you come August the 20th, that time, August the 20th, 2022, their second meeting. Like, yes, Usyk is also the belt. By the way, this fun fact. This is also, I actually finally looked this up, and at this date on BoxRec.com, while I was making this podcast, it did stated, I forgot to put this out, that even though the IBF, WBA Super World, and the IBO and WBO is on the line, this is Usyk's first title defense. It also stated that this is also the Ring Magazine and the Lineal World Heavyweight title vacant, which means Usyk wins this fight, he only has one more belt to fight, and that's the WBC. So he's won every belt except the WBC at this moment. He defeats Joshua in this fight, it's over. By the way, Joshua's rated number 4 in the IBF WBO, number 6 in the WBA during the month of May and April in 2022, months before the fight. They already put the fight on, and even though the fight generated a 1.249 million pay-per-view buy in the United Kingdom, I think it goes to show you that I think a lot of fans are tired of British boxers fighting for titles. It's not entertaining. We want to see other countries around the world fight for world titles, but I don't think we'll ever get that. It's just impossible, and after watching this, yeah, I think everyone was tired about this. Like, even after the end of the fight, when Usyk won the fight by split decision, and you have Anthony Joshua on the mic saying this crazy stuff, this or that, in the ring, I think everyone can tell that Joshua was losing it. Like, yeah, he comes back, wins a few fights in 2023, takes on a Francis Ngannou this year, but yet again, I don't know. Like, he's still a killer contender, but I just don't see Joshua coming back into the boxing ring for this win. He loses twice against Usyk, so why have a third rematch? Is that what fans want to see? No. But yeah, this is the crazy part. You come August the 26th, 2023, and you have the WBA regular champion, Daniel Dubois. He takes on a hype job from Don King Promotions. And then in December, he barely wins in December by injuring himself in his leg against a South African fighter of Kevin Lorena, which is more deserving to fight to become champion that day. And that's going to be another video I'm going to talk about, because it's so lame. But guys, I'm going to be honest. This fight, now, even though this is the last fight, I'm going to go through it by detail, as best as I can. So mostly we already know. The referee gets them in. The announcer announces each fighter, this or that, brings the fighters to the ring. Referee brings the fighters to the ring, tells them what you explained in the dressing room. It's hilarious because he puts his hands near both of their belts, telling them don't hit below the belt. And even though you do see Alexander Usyk's belt, he is wearing it a little bit high, but there's a lot of boxers that do that. And I think that is a problem when you try to understand. When you say don't hit below the belt, they're trying to say don't hit him in the Johnson, below the Johnson. And I think that's the problem with some boxers. Some referees take that seriously, but some don't. They just say as long as you don't hit below the belt, it's all right. It doesn't matter if you don't hit him in the Johnson, just don't hit below the belt. But I think that's the problem. When you see this, it was crazy. So both of them study each other the first seconds, and out of nowhere, Usyk southpaw, Dubois orthodox. Like every fight, they all fight each other. Like he's leading off with his right foot, Dubois is leading off with his left foot, and then he attacks his fighter early on in the fight. And surprisingly, they managed to hold it off each other in the first round. But even though Usyk at this moment is doing the more job, like he's winning the rounds, he's winning them easily. Like the first round was a piece of cake. The second round was a piece of cake. The third round was a piece of cake. He was just good, winning good job, and he was doing the job. They booked this match, and Dubois. There was one moment in round 2, around the minute and 15-second mark, like 1 minute and 15 seconds, the match where Dubois throws a huge low punch below his right buttocks, which was really low. So I think it goes to show you that Dubois was landing punches below his belt at some point. There was moments in round 3 when Dubois, like in the first minute of the third round, Dubois, there was moments where Usyk actually went for a 2-punch combination with the right hand. And so there was chances. There was a chance. He was doing a better job. And then we come to round 4, and round 4 was somewhat of a good round for Dubois. Was it better? Well, Usyk did a better job a little bit. Like, he did start out, he leads on, punches, and there were times that they were leading off, but there were still 2-punch combinations, jabs, this or that. Usyk barely managed to hold off the round a little bit. Like, it seemed interesting, but Usyk kind of did the job. But then come round 5, and when watching this live at the time, was scary. Thinking that round 4 was a better round for Dubois, round 5 should have been his round. It should have been the end of the fight. We weren't even 30 seconds into the 5th round. With 2 minutes and 40 seconds left of the fight, Dubois angles his left, jabs to his body, turns his right, hits him below the belt. And even though the camera angle that was live at the time was cameraing Usyk's back, so you can only see his back but not his body side, so you couldn't tell if it hit him in the low blow or not. But Usyk goes down, drops down, he's on his knees. The referee's just putting his hands down as slip, didn't count. He times out the fight, which goes to show you the commentators are out of it. The commentators are shocked. I think it goes to show you. And it's surprising because the fans and the audience that day in Poland were not cheering. They weren't surprised that they saw that. Like, some fans were cheering, but you can hear the crowd were somewhat silent. When they saw that, the crowd was silent. But yeah, when you see the replays, the replay was scary. Like, you see Usyk crawling with his butt laying on the ring. He's sweating. He's breathing. He's taking the wind out of him. Even the press conference was funny when they made fun about that. But yeah, I think it goes to show you Usyk got lucky. Like, he should have been out for the 10 count. But then come round 6, round 7, he was back. Dubois just had nothing left in him. He knocked him out in round 8, which wasn't a surprise. And even though round 8 had nothing, like, he just landed good combination. Then come round 9, he finished off with a bang. Like, there's nothing much you can say about it. Usyk won the fight, and that's about it. And guys, the last information I'd like to say before I end this podcast is this. And it's going to be this. I think this is a lesson. Now, even though Usyk almost might have lost this fight, he would come back and win the fight, and that's it. Wins the fight against Fury, and now he's undisputed heavyweight champion. But at the end of the day, guys, when you see the footage and see everything that's happened during the time when you watch this, I think you viewers can tell that even though with all the marbles collected, I think this is the main reason people have to understand. Just because you're a great undisputed heavyweight champion and such doesn't mean you're not the best fighter. I think people have to learn is that Rocky Marciano is never a perfect fighter. You'll never have a perfect fighter in your life. I guess that's the lesson we have to learn, is that just because you're heavyweight champion, the best, doesn't mean that you're not going to beat everyone in the card. You'll never be a perfect fighter, and I think that's the lesson we have to learn. And considering Usyk got lucky winning his last 2 fights, I think that's the problem. But guys, at the end of the day, there is some interesting stuff you have to understand. And even though I will end this podcast in a couple minutes right now, but I just want to talk about this. Guys, the top rankings are such ridiculous. Like, we're waiting for Ajit Caballel, Joey Zhang, a little bit of Joseph Parker, Martin Bakal, Otto Valin, Efe Ajagba, Luis Ortiz, Phil Pergovich, Arslanbek Makhmudov, but you also have Kevin Lerena, Kubrat Poev. Like, these are fighters from other parts of the country. Can you imagine if any of these fighters fight for a world title? You know what they're going to get? They're going to get big money. They're going to get viewership numbers skyrocketed. But if you're going to have Alexander Usyk have a rematch, like if he beats Fury again in December, what's his next fight going to be? Are they going to have that interim IBF fight in Wembley with AJ and Daniel Dubois? Who wants to watch that fight? And if they win, we're going to have a rematch with them taking on Usyk again. We're not here to see Usyk fight again. He comes in 2025, he'll take on one of the fighters he already beat. Then come 2026 again. How are we supposed to know that Ajit Caballel will not be out of the rankings if he still has an undefeated record in the next couple years? What about Phil Pergovich? He's been struggling so much. Joey Zhang is trying his best to stay alive in boxing. Give them a world title. If we can just have other countries fight for a world title instead of having these rematch fights, then this crap wouldn't be a waste of time. It's so bad to see that. I don't want to see rematch fights. I don't want to see British fighters. Like, guys, it's such tiring to see these 3 British boxers taking on this Ukrainian fighter that's undisputed. Like, guys, even if Usyk will win the fight in December, I do believe he still has a couple more fights left in him. Like, maybe if he's 25-0, he might retire undefeated at that moment. I know he still has a few more left in him, but just no, come on, just give someone else the gold. Give someone else a chance to fight for a title shot. Give them another chance. We want other countries to fight for a world title just so their country can watch this live. Guys, can you imagine how many viewership numbers when Samuel Peter was the world heavyweight champion, when he won the WBC belt back in the old days when he was the champion for the WBC? Dude, the numbers and the ratings at the time when he defeated Oleg Maskaev back in March the 8th, 2008, it stated that the overall number was 400 million people watched it at the time with 180 countries. Most of them were African viewers. At least 30 million people in Nigeria watched that fight, despite the fight was 7 hours, was a 7-hour time difference, so some had to go to bed at the time. But the population estimated a big number at the time. I just guess this is the understanding. This is what happens to boxing when you have other countries trying to fight for a title, but you have these 3 British people and this Ukraine fighter. No, that's not. I think people have to understand this is not heavyweight boxing. Guys, even though Alexander Usyk said he's going back to cruiserweight, but guys, if Mitsuru Brandon Tajima, a Japanese fighter that was over 260 pounds in his time during his last fight, he loses 40 pounds at 225 to go to bridgerweight only to lose his first fight. If that didn't work for him, it's not going to work for Usyk. Guys, losing weight when you're 37 to 38 years old, I don't think that's a healthy habit, and I just don't think Usyk should do any of this. Guys, if Usyk's watching this, I just say, just finish the fight with Fury in December, but I don't think that fight will ever happen after the controversy of the bar fight and the pub that Fury was in a few days ago. Just retire. Just vacate all the belts just so someone else will have a chance for a fight, and that's it. That's the end of the story, guys. Sorry for making this podcast short, but it's probably for the best because next time it's going to be the WBA regular heavyweight championship, guys, and there's going to be a lot of information that I haven't talked about. But that being said, thanks for watching Chapter 5, the WBA Super Champion. With that being said, FoxWolf out.